Hi everyone, and welcome to part 8 of our tutorial series tyFLOW for ARCHVIZ. In this video, I would like to show you how you can do object replacement in 3ds Max using tyFLOW. But before we jump into 3ds Max and do the creation of all the things, let me show you an image provided by Heldo Visual Studio in Germany. And at this point, I want to thank you for providing me this image and the permission for showing it in my tutorial. I do appreciate it a lot. Here we have a ceiling, and that ceiling is created out of several elements, as you can see. We have the blank elements and we have these light panels going on. And at the first glance, it looks like it is following a certain pattern or something, but this is actually not the case. What the artist wanted to do here was having the possibility to replace one of these panels, no matter which one, and or multiple, as you can see, at any given time and wherever he wanted to be. So whenever he needed a light panel, he wanted to have a way to just switch between the light panel and just the blank panels here without being forced to follow a certain pattern or sequencer or an array or something like that. He wanted the absolute freedom to create the light pattern or scattering on his ceiling the way he wanted. So, and here you can see above this box, for example, there is just an empty room or free of lights. Here you can see we have just two panels between these two light panels, and then it switches to four panels and then another light and so on and so forth. So it is not following a certain pattern as such, and it is flexible, and he can go and change everything on this ceiling at any given time. And this was actually the task and his mission, and this is accomplished, as you can see, with tyFLOW in this project. So we can really use it in our everyday projects. Now I'm going to show you how we can do the exact same thing in 3D Studio Max. Here we are in 3D Studio Max, where I already have my three panels created. I have a blank panel, and I have these air ventilation panel, and also a light panel, and I want to create a ceiling with the blank panels only, and then go and use tyFLOW in order to replace all of these segments that I want with one of these other panels here. So now the way I'm going to do that is using rail clone. I already have my shape of my ceiling here, and rail clone is the fastest way for me to go and create my ceiling. It's a powerful plugin, and it does much more than just creating ceiling. But here in this example, just go to my editor here, and here I don't have to do anything from the scratch because I can go and use a built-in macro. So I go to the macros and then to the generators, floors, and here I'm gonna drag out this plank floor macro into my editor. Now that has two inputs, which is the spline, and the other one is the segment, which will get distributed inside of our clipping area. So I'm gonna select my spline here as my clipping area, and I'm gonna select my blank segment here in my layers list as my segment for the ceiling. There we go. Now I can go and close this. Next thing I have to check is make sure that use segment material is on, and in the display rollout it is set to mesh, and then we are actually good to go. So here we have our ceiling created out of several panels, which is actually this one. So now the next thing is to go and make sure that we have access to each single panel. This is not given in rail clone yet, and for this I'm going to use tyFLOW. So I'm going to add a tyFLOW object into my scene. then open the editor. Here I go and drag birth object operator and then pick my ceiling. So it switches to the tyFLOW color right now. Let me go and set it maybe to some greenish or something. And when I look at it, it looks as there are several segments, but this is not the case really. When I go and switch the display from geometry to my large dots, I'm gonna see one single dot right here in the center only. So this is the only particle that is generated right now. And if I go and do anything with that, it will affect the entire ceiling. So when I go and rotate it, for example, as you can see, it goes and rotates the whole thing and not just one single particle. And that is not what we want. So we want the access to each single element that we have here. And for this, we have to go back to birth objects and then turn on split object elements. Now when we go and switch the display mode again to large dots, we're going to see a bunch of dots here now. And these now turned each single element into a single particle. And as you can see, we have 672 particles instead of one, which we had right here before splitting the object. So without it, I just have one single particle. And when we go and split element, that is what we got. And this is exactly what we need. So each single element or panel is now a particle that we can go and access. So let me go and switch back to geometry and turn off rotation. Now we have to find a way to explain or tell tyFLOW which particle we would like to change. And this is what we can do using a so-called object test operator. In this object test, it will go and test for a certain object that we can define which one. And then based on the parameters and the settings, pass the test or fail the test. For this, I'm going to create a helper object. So let me just go to the create stack, switch to helpers, and then go to the standard. I'm going to create a point helper with a box and the size of 25. Just click in my scene, and then I'm going to go and align it with my ceiling here. I'm going to set it just right in the center of my ceiling, and there I have it. There it is. Now in tyFLOW, I can say the object test operator should use this object, which is my helper, and test for its distance. So it is actually testing the particle distance to this object. And if it is in the range of 10 centimeters, so if the distance from the center of our helper is closer than 10 centimeters to the position of the particle, let me switch it back to the dots. Now see, if that element or that object is going closer than 10 centimeters, which is defined here, that particle should get sent to the next event. So when I move that, this is what is happening. So it now sent that particle to this event, and only this particle, because that is now in the range of 10 centimeters close to our point, which is our helper here. And when that happens, this particle will get sent to the next event. So when I move it here, it is changing this one. When I go here, it is changing this one. So that is going automatically whenever I move that to. Now let me go back to our geometry. So we have a real image of what is going on. So when I move it, it is just changing the color, which indicates that it is now in our second event. And when I go and add the rotation into this one, and rotate it, it will only rotate that particle and not everything else. So we have now control over a single particle. And now, instead of rotation, we can go and just use a shape operator, remove what is inside of this list by default, which is a triangle, remove that. Then I'm going and selecting my light segment, the light panel, and add selected. So the light panel is now as my shape, and when I turn it around and go closer, you're going to see the difference between the design. There is an edge going on, and here we have none. So these are the blank panels, and these guys are our light panels. I'm going to color them yellow, so yellowish, and that is what we get now. And this is a really easy way to switch between one shape to the other. Now we can use multiple of these helpers. So I can shift drag it, create an instance, and now nothing happens because it is not in our list here. So I'm going to go and add selected again, and as soon as I do that, it will change this color as well, and it switches to our light panel shape. Now the problem is when I have 10, 20, 30 or multiple of these guys, I always would have to go back into my setup and then add it to my list in order for it to work. And when I remove one of those because I don't need them, I still have to go back to my list again and remove which is deleted. And that can be really annoying when you have a huge project to work on and where you have really tons of objects to replace. What we can do instead of going back and forward into that list is using a so-called tyCollection helper. So I'm going to remove these objects from my list for now and close the operator. Then I'm going to the helpers again. Then I switch to tyFLOW and select tyCollection helper. Click and drag it into my scene and then switch to the modifier stack where I see the properties. Here we can go and pick all the objects we need and we want to collect in this tyCollection, or we can go and activate enable import by layer, which is a much better way for us to go. Now I'm going to go and select my helpers here in my layer explorer and then send them to a new layer and call this layer helpers LP, which is light panels. Now I can go back to my tyCollection, enable import by layer, select layer, and then select these helpers LP layer. Now this tyCollection will look at this layer and collect everything which is inside of it. Now we can go back to our tyFLOW and open the editor again. Go to the object test operator, and in this list we do not add any kind of helpers but the tyCollection that we just created. Select it, add selected. Now we have the tyCollection here in this list, which then includes all the helpers. And now as you can see, it is already done for us. The cool thing about that is when I go and create another instance out of that and let that go, it will automatically work as soon as I am closer than 10 centimeters to that center. So now I can go and have multiple of these without going back and forward into my editor and remove or add anything into that list again and again. And this is really a fast and efficient way to work with it. So I can go do this. I can actually go and do multiple. Then OK. Now we have to move each single one into its place. So we actually change this color because it is kind of bothering me. Then we have this guy, and I can move it that way, etc. So as you can see, I can have him wherever I want, and it will switch to my next shape that I defined in my tyFLOW. So in this case, the light panels. Now you can have multiple shapes in one setup. So we can go back into our editor, and what we can do is drag out another object test, and we go and create also another Ty collection. So here's our Ty collection. I'm going to shift drag it out and create a copy, not an instance, and go and rename this to Ty collection AV, which is air ventilation. And those are our next segments that we can use. So, and then for this one, we have to go and remove that helpers layer that we already had from the last time, and then create some helpers. I'm going to just duplicate one of these guys, just clone it, and this time as a copy, and call that maybe helper AV01. So that is for the air ventilation and not for the lights. So now I can go and select this one here in my list and send it to a new layer and call that layer helpers AV, and back to my Ty collection AV. Here I can go and select the layer, the new helpers AV layer, select. Now that will send stuff into our next event, which is this one. I'm gonna make that maybe now greenish or something. And here we need the air ventilation segment. But before that, I have to go and pick my new Ty collection into my list, and then go and create a new shape operator. And the shape operator has this triangle as default again. Remove this, select the segment for the air ventilation, and add selected. Now this will change to that segment with the air ventilation on it. There we go. So when I go and duplicate or clone one of these, that will give me an air ventilation. And when I go and duplicate one of these guys here, that will replace it with a light. So now I can have multiple objects and place them wherever I want them. Here on my ceiling. And this is really a fast and efficient way to replace your objects in such a case. And it's pretty easy to manage, as you can see, though it is not a crazy setup going on here. It's really simple, and what you have to take care of are just these two Ty collections where you define which one should collect what from which layer, and that is also easy to manage. So all you have to do is just create two different layers, name them the way you want them, and then go and make sure that each one is in its proper tyFLOW collection or Ty collection. So by selecting the right layer for the right collection, and here we have to add them to the list of the object test and send them to their corresponding event. And here we can change the shapes as we want them. This is actually the way that was done in this project from Heldo Visual Studio in Germany. Now I also have an exterior scene which has a little more stuff going on than just a simple ceiling, but this is just done the same way as I showed you right before. So if I want to go and replace this one, I can just move it around. If I want another one, I can just go and create an instance for this helper. If I don't need it, I can just go and delete this. If I want to remove or move that one, or just clone this guy, I can do that this way. The same for the light here. So when we drag out another one, it will create another light right in place where it is. And in this way, I have total control and the flexibility to replace my objects in my scene when and wherever I need them. And that is exactly the same way. So it is, let me go to the editor again. So it is just a simple thing that I did. So the ray clone element was imported, which is the floor in this case, not the ceiling. Then I have several object test operators here, and these are working with several Ty collection helpers. And each of those collections is looking at another layer and will send the particles close to this or whatever object then to its corresponding event. And that is the entire setup. Now this is it for this tutorial, and I hope that this is helpful and useful to you for your projects, and I'm wishing you a great and successful time, and see you soon. Bye bye.